Welcome to PROCURE Health Talks, a webinar specially designed for men affected by prostate cancer and their loved ones. The various topics covered in these webinars are intended to provide reliable information based on the concerns and questions asked to PROCURE healthcare professionals. Let's begin.
Hello, I'm Kim Sullivan. Welcome to PROCURE Health Talks. If you have a natural caregiver, if you are a natural caregiver, or if you know someone in this situation, this webinar is for you. Here are a few statements. Well, today the objective is to share tips, tools, and resources so that you can play your caregiving role to the best of your ability. By the end of this interview, we're hoping that you realize that burnout is at your doorstep. If you believe that you can do everything independently, well, you may need this wake-up call tonight. We're here today with Miss Julie Bickerstaff. She's a director for caregiver support and knowledge transfer at l'Appui. Hello. Let's start with a simple question. Who is a natural caregiver? Well, I like saying that it could be anyone. We all know natural caregivers. Rosalind Carter famously said, there are 4 types of people in the world. Those who were natural caregivers, those who will be, those who currently are, and those who are care recipients. So we all know natural caregivers. It could be a parent caring for an adult handicapped child. It could be someone taking care of a spouse who is seriously ill. It could be a child taking care of an aging parent. It could be a neighbor helping out an elderly person, getting them groceries or clearing their driveway after a snowstorm. It could be someone taking care of their sister who has mental health issues, going through depression. So natural caregiving comes in many forms. They're all around us. In terms of numbers, it's 8 million people in Canada. That means 1 person out of 4 in this country. So if you don't know any natural caregiver, I would be surprised. Yes, so it comes in many forms, and these people have multiple roles, right? Yes, this is a role that's added on to our other social roles. We're spouses, children, workers, volunteers involved in our community. And at one point in our life, we get this additional role of a natural caregiver. This can come very abruptly in our life. My spouse just had a car accident or a stroke. So extremely sudden. And I need to cope with this new reality on the spot. In other circumstances, it's very progressive. It comes very softly. Oh, my mother is starting to have a hard time getting her groceries, so I'll do it for her. Or maybe she asks me to come with her to a doctor's appointment because she's not sure that she's going to remember everything that the physician will say. So yeah, it adds on gradually. Little things. And these lead us into embodying a natural caregiving role for someone who is becoming more frail, who has decreasing independence, who's quadriplegic perhaps, etc. Other issues specific to each step of this journey? Yes, absolutely. Typically early on, when we receive the news of a new diagnosis, it's quite specific. There's a period of time where we need to absorb the initial shock. We need to understand what this means. A lot of worries come in this period, a lot of stress, because there are a lot of unknowns. It's quite uncomfortable. We're like ducks paddling underwater. We're quickly wanting to, get information about this illness, for instance, discussing with people going through something similar to try to figure out what's upcoming. So a lot of worries and stress early on. Mid-journey, after a little while, we found a pace, we found a cruising speed, but fatigue is seeping in. We may need more respite services, more support, because, for instance, the illness has progressed and now we realize that, the house is not well adapted. We need to carry out renovations. So there's other things that come up as the illness progresses, say. Now, if the situation is one of end of life, if the care recipient is on the way to their end of life, then we need to look at how the support is needed, how the person wants this to happen, and how we as a caregiver will take our lives back when this natural caregiving role ends. So a host of different issues all along the journey. We need to be able to ask for help, to accept help, to set our limits, to ward off burnout and not take too much on our shoulders. There will be a lot of small losses along the way. The relationship between the caregiver and the care recipient will evolve. Maybe we'll have projects that will not come to fruition, for instance. So some losses all along this journey. Sometimes it's very condensed and intense on, say, just a few months. Say my spouse has a very aggressive cancer. It's only going to last a few months. It was going to be extremely intense. Sometimes it's a long marathon. It could be 15 years, with Alzheimer's disease, for instance. And I need to adjust at every step of the way. These are different and distinct journeys, but natural caregivers do go through universal emotions, guilt, burnout. A lot of this is shared amongst caregivers. As I was listening to you just now, I kept thinking to myself, the initial shock is so hard. The second period is hard. The grieving is hard. Is one of these phases generally perceived as the hardest? Well, with our helpline, we talk to caregivers every day. Our observation is this: it depends. It depends on people. It depends on the situation. It depends on illness progression, illness type, the family. For some people, the diagnosis is the hard part. Once they've absorbed the shock, that they've accepted that this illness is now part of their lives, then they move on to fighter mode. Okay, let's get some structure, let's get some help, let's do this thing. And then so they're moving on to a more positive outlook after this step of initial shock. For others, the journey will be quite different. Early on, they will be very proactive. Okay, let's get information. We're going to tackle this head on. We're going to be strong. We're going to withstand this together as a team. Then time goes on, and they get to a point when they're worn out. They completely run out of steam. It could be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months later that they finally knock on our door. I assume that for you, not just you personally, but for your team within the organization, it isn't easy to know how to support these people. You know that many natural caregivers are minimizing some aspects of what they're doing or what they should be doing. Definitely. What we hear time and time again is people reach out to us too late. what they don't know, or what they're minimizing actually, is themselves. It's that simple. It is something very normal, very human. When a loved one is going through something difficult, we channel all of our energy into this situation and this person. We give them everything, and we downplay our own needs. This is akin to new parents with a new baby. For some time there, your love life goes out the window, straight out the window. And we give everything that we have to this new baby and to supporting their development. The phenomenon is very similar for caregivers. They're going to minimize their own needs, to get rest, to not have every moment revolve around the illness, to get away, to laugh, to enjoy themselves. They may feel a lot of guilt related to these activities. Unfortunately, the main issue is that they don't know how much they cannot do that, and how much practicing self-care is crucial. They need to find every day something to do for themselves. Yes, and I think we'll get back to that in more detail in a bit. And in the intro, where we're saying, if you think you can do this all by yourself, all on your own, maybe this is going to be a little wake-up call. But you mentioned when people call you, it's often too late. I assume that there are tools that you can refer to natural caregivers. Of course, there are many. Our helpline is here for listening to you and giving information. This is the gateway. It is open every day for all caregivers in Quebec. Whether you live in Chibougamau or Montreal, you can call us and we will help you, and we refer you to local community-based services. We're well aware of organizations who support natural caregivers in each region of the province, so we can quickly refer you to a community-based service because we're a provincial service. We're not community-based. So our job is to do this. As long as you don't have a need for something, you're not aware that an organization exists, right? As long as your mother hasn't been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, you don't know that Alzheimer's associations exist, right? And these organizations offer conferences, training, respite services, support services. They have counselors that can go to people's place and support spouses, children. These services are set up throughout the province. But just like anything else, if you don't need it, you don't see it. So our role is to tell natural caregivers that these resources exist, that they're not alone, and that they need to reach out. We encourage them to knock on these doors and to dissipate distrust and dissipate misplaced pride that says, I can do all of this on my own. I don't want to get help. What are people going to think? So there's a lot of things that need to be deconstructed and teased out to really help people get the support. There's information services, training, psychosocial services, free services. Of course, the Health and Social Services Network offer those, but there's also social economy businesses that can help with housework, say. A lot of things exist, but people are not aware of these, unfortunately. Yes, and you were saying that we need to tease these out. I assume that natural caregivers tend to not verbalize their own needs when they reach out to you. Correct. What we see happening is, because the care recipient is the person who is ill, we focus on them. Health professionals focus on their patient, right? social circles also will focus on this person who is in need, and everyone dismisses the natural caregiver in this process. So when caregivers call us, they apply the same rationale. They're trying to find services to support the care recipient because, of course, that helps to lighten their own load. It's very logical. But our role after, this initial request, they may ask maybe about a meal service to help my mother so that I don't have to cook for her every day. Yes, we can find these services for them, for sure. But the subsequent question is, how about you? How are you doing? Yes, and it's great that you're there to ask the question. I'm curious to know, one of the circumstances leading to natural caregiving is an aging parent, and we may live in a multi-ethnic urban center. L'Appui offers French services, right? We offer French and English services, fully bilingual services. My team is made up of 25 counselors. A couple of them speak additional languages, so every now and then we can accommodate other languages. But for sure, our services are offered in English and in French. That's great to know because I may speak French, but perhaps my mother doesn't, right? This is so fantastic to know. It's great to be speaking about this. Now, going back to the caregiver who is not comfortable thinking about themselves, what are the consequences of a natural caregiver sidelining themselves? Oh, there are many. I don't want to paint a bleak picture of this reality because there are many positive aspects that we'll get to in a bit. But yes, the situation generates stress, worry, fatigue, perhaps anger, irritability. There are diseases that are difficult to manage on a daily basis. Alzheimer's disease would be one of them. And we may feel something that's very valid, but we may feel frustrated with the symptoms of the disease itself. We can also observe isolation, especially if we have a more difficult time sharing with our social circle what we're feeling. For any reason, we may have this tendency to withdraw and to isolate themselves. We know that diseases tend to drive people away. People are uncomfortable with serious illnesses, or perhaps leading to death. There are various contexts, but people may feel uncomfortable. The caregiver may also feel overwhelmed by the situation. So all of these elements contribute to eroding the mental and physical health of the natural caregiver. So we try to act preemptively and early on to prevent burnout. One of our key messages is this: set services early on. Make it a habit to rest, because it isn't down the road that this will be beneficial. If you're going to rest once you're already burnt out, it will not be beneficial. But if you do this early on, it will be beneficial throughout the journey, and it will allow you to run the marathon. And I'm sure that being told this makes a difference. You're calling a helpline like L'Appui, and you're told, get rest, recharge your batteries. I think it can help you feel less guilty of doing so. Yes, indeed. It helps to legitimize that our need to rest is a valid one, right? And this may be a process, getting rid of the guilt, that can be sometimes deeply rooted. But yes, being told this is one of the keys to move on to the next step, Okay, now talking about the positive aspects. Yes, many natural caregivers tell us that this context really enriched the relationship with the care recipient. they're seeing the person under a new light. We have a lot of wonderful stories and testimonies about children supporting an aging parent who tell us, all of my life, my mother, my father was very tough, quite cold, but the diagnosis eroded this away. I'm discovering someone new who is soft, who is using humor, and I'm developing a new relationship, and it helps to heal some aspects of the relationship. And also the time spent with this person fosters intimacy and closeness, right? Yes, indeed. And some people feel very valued playing this role. Some people discover some unsuspected strengths, some skills that they can actually transfer to other aspects of their lives. They see more confidence with their own abilities. They say, I would have never thought that I could do this. And ultimately, people tell us also that the situation helped to improve family dynamics, because from the moment they reach out for help, their family gets mobilized, and they're forced, in fact, to better communicate their needs. And the whole family dynamics is healthier as a result. So we really have some wonderful positive aspects through this experience. I love the fact that you mention when people realize that it's time to ask for help. And I'm wondering, perhaps this is the hardest, when, knowing when to raise the flag, when they see the signs that it is time. Yes, unfortunately, we have a lot of blind spots about ourselves, right? And we get way too far. With most people, we have this desire to be independent, to be capable, do it by ourselves, Unfortunately, we're all very much steeped in this culture to say, I'm strong, I'm able, I'm independent. So it takes a long time before we realize that this is not working out anymore. And unfortunately, it's typically burnout symptoms, being irritable, insomnia, feeling also very physical symptoms. These are the signs that help someone to raise a flag. And it's not too late, but we've gone far out. We've tapped out our personal resources. So this is why our message is this: do not wait, But more than that, actually, is make some healthy habits from the start. Reach out to resources within your social circle, with your employer also. Some people wait a very long time before they tell their employer, I am a natural caregiver. I'm taking care of, say, a spouse or whomever else, and I will need a little bit of support. I may need to take occasional leaves, and I'd like some help with that. So just naming this helps to normalize the situation. And there may be colleagues that step in and say, hey, can I do something to help? Yes, because you said, 1/4 of people know a natural caregiver. So for sure, you have colleagues who are in the same boat. So maybe you can share about it. That helps you to vent, because venting is normal at times, just saying, I can't do this anymore. Is this one of your pieces of advice to not sink? Yes, definitely. One of these first keys is to realize, and this is why we have this webinar, right? To acknowledge, oh, I am playing this role. This is an additional role added onto all my other roles. And if I'm not careful in balancing things out, I'm at the risk of foundering and burning out. So acknowledging this role, also asking for help with our friends and loved ones, organizations, our community, our village, and also accepting help is also crucial. Identify in your network as early as possible, any organization that can provide services for you. There are organizations that we tend to not think about. Oftentimes what we see is someone finds out, say, that their spouse has cancer. We have the Canadian Cancer Society or PROCURE, so people tend to refer to these organizations. They resonate because they target the disease that is now part of my life. But there's a whole ecosystem of services that can also come in handy that I may not think about. Social economy businesses for housework, for meal services. There's also caregiver associations. They exist in every region of the province. These associations set up support groups, coffee hours. So there's a lot of other doors to knock on. It can really help to have this safety net implemented. Of course, caregivers are forced to discover their limits, to express them, and to uphold them. So this is quite a self-awareness exercise also. As always, I tell people to find a moment, even if it's just 1 minute, 1 moment daily to do something you enjoy. Otherwise, it's too heavy to always focus on the disease and on difficult things. So you need to find little outlets here and there daily. Let's say that I'm part of the village. I'm part of the 1/4 of people who may not be a caregiver, but who knows someone who is a natural caregiver. So I know someone in this situation. I may ask, "How are you doing?" The person says, "I'm fine." So are there signs that I need to watch out for to make sure that this person is actually doing okay? Yeah, for sure. When we're aware that someone is a natural caregiver, we know that this is something demanding, right? It's a trying time. So we should be on the lookout indeed for certain signs. Isolation. People may, decline your invitations, repeated invitations. Whereas in the past, they would have gladly accepted the invitation, There's a switch there that is a sign that something is going on. Oftentimes also people may call the natural caregiver, and the tendency for this person when you're checking in is to say, "Oh, Mark is doing well, the treatments are going well." They're talking about the care recipient, and then you need to dig deeper. What about you? And just opening that door, if there's distress, we'll catch it. There may be a sigh. There may be a quavering voice. We feel that, something is going on, because not a lot of people are asking about how the caregiver is doing. We may feel this vulnerability, and this is the time to just welcome it without judgment and just offer your presence, offer an ear. And ultimately, just ask, what do you need? What would help? What would, not give advice, but just asking what you can do. Yes, this is the best way to help, because a lot of people kind of step away because they're uncomfortable with the disease, and they may be satisfied with the quick answer that, the person is doing fine. But we actually should be digging deeper. Yes, and sometimes you need to ask the question a second time, indirectly. Are you sure you don't want to have a chat over coffee? Or did you do something today that you enjoyed? Oh, that's a fantastic question. There are ways. Yes, there are ways. If we are the care recipient, how can we support our natural caregiver? Is there something we can do to make sure that our natural caregiver is not going to sink? Yeah, this is a very sensitive question because, of course, the care recipient is going through a very tough time. The care recipient is not necessarily, their normal self. They may be very emotional. They have a lot on their mind. So it's sensitive because we don't want either of them, of the two. It could be a couple or it could be another type of relationship, whichever. But we're talking about a team of two people. And in an ideal situation, both of them are able to support each other and be there for each other. But of course, this is utopian. It's kind of an idealized picture. For sure, if there is open communication, when both people are able to share how they're feeling, what their experience is through this time, of course, that is helpful for both parties. So, not doing this every man for himself type of thing. This would be the ideal thing. In real life now, there's a lot of relationship issues that play a role, which means it can be tricky. For the care recipient, if they are able to recognize that their caregiver is playing an additional role and also needs support, they may be able to say, if you're going to help me, then you need to help yourself. You can't do this all on your own. This makes a huge, huge difference. But we can't necessarily expect the care recipient to be in this mindset and to have this kind of awareness, because the care recipient is also, undergoing the shock of the diagnosis and a lot of emotions. So it's a personal journey and everyone has their own rhythm. And communication is not always easy. Yes, in any relationship, but it is key nonetheless. You were saying earlier that you often receive the call once it's too late. So when should we reach out for help and what type of help can we expect to get? You already mentioned a whole array of support services, but let's say I just received the news. Should I reach out now? Yes, right when receiving the diagnosis. We work a lot on early intervention. We've worked very hard with physicians because typically when a physician gives some bad news, there is the patient and they have a family member with them, right, in the physician's office. So we work with doctors so that they have the habit of encouraging the loved one to act. And we have mechanisms so that the loved one can be referred to our helpline so that very early on, right when they get the diagnosis, the caregiver is aware that, oh, okay, this is going to be tough, this is going to be demanding, but services exist. And even though I don't need right now this help, I know that the help is out there. Yes, and it must reduce stress quite a bit, to know that some service exists maybe for preparing meals and such. You may not need them now, you may not need them for years, but just knowing that they exist is a relief in itself. Yes, absolutely. It is. And it removes a lot of unknown, right? So the types of services, again, that we may look for early on, anything related to information about the disease. You may attend conferences. There's a lot of content online as well. So if you have information services, typically that's the least confronting, right? So more accessible. People typically are looking for knowledge to understand the disease, the symptoms, the treatments, and know what is upcoming, right? So that's easy enough. It's not confronting, it's not threatening. People are open to using this type of service. Then we can move to something that's a little bit more demanding, training-wise. So there are trainings to support natural caregivers. Some trainings focus on Alzheimer's disease and their natural caregivers. There are a lot of elements of communication, how to communicate with someone who has cognitive impairment, there's also trainings for parents of handicapped children. There are techniques to learn. There's a lot of different services. We also offer trainings on stress management. So a lot of different tools exist. More than we tend to think. Yes, absolutely. More than we think. There are psychosocial services, intervention workers. There's respite services also that's offered, maybe as a day center or as a drop-in center. There's really, really a whole array of services throughout the province. A question for you. Earlier, you were mentioning that one of the tricky steps was talking to your employer. It can feel threatening. I can just, imagine talking to my boss to say that I'm going on parental leave. It stresses me out. So, saying that I'm a natural caregiver. Yeah, and I don't really know what it's going to involve. There's a lot of unknown. I may take a leave of absence at some point. Right. So are there specific rights for natural caregivers? Specific tools for the workplace? Well, we did make significant progress as regards to the rights of natural caregivers. The CNESST now awards 2 paid days per year that our employer has to award us for our natural caregiving duties. So we're still in the infancy of measures and public policies that apply to natural caregivers. Now, beyond legislation, strictly speaking, there are employers who already have incorporated in their internal policies or work agreements some clauses about being benevolent to natural caregivers. So depending on your workplace, there are various degrees of openness, but still, natural caregiving is a social issue that is becoming more and more commonly discussed. Employers themselves will likely be a natural caregiver at some point and experience this. Work-life balance is also a common topic, and that includes natural caregiving. So we do see initiatives in large or mid-sized businesses, initiatives such as offering lunchtime conferences for employees about natural caregiving, because there's a desire to support employees going through this. As long as you don't face the situation, you don't know that resources exist. Just like society resources or community-based resources, there can be resources in their workplace that are unsuspected. That's fantastic. This is very eye-opening for me. I hope it's eye-opening for people watching as well. Now, we mentioned communication and how that can be thorny. There are major issues that can emerge if we fail to communicate properly if you're a natural caregiver. So either talking with our loved one, with the care recipient, with our employer, what would be the biggest issue with regards to communication? Well, what we detect around communication, what comes in and hampers communication is feelings that are very generalized in the caregiver population. And the first one, the main culprit, is guilt. When I feel guilty, it's very difficult to address the fact that I may need rest. I may need a break because I feel too much guilt. I don't even want to think about this because I'm ashamed. So this hampers, unnecessary guilt hampers communication a lot. Unnecessary guilt is not helpful for anyone. Second, a feeling of breaking their commitment. Caregivers tell us that they promised something. They committed to taking care of this person in sickness and in health. And they tell us how uncomfortable they feel with opening up a discussion about their own needs. It seems to them like they're betraying their commitment to this person. Third, fear of causing pain. The care recipient is going through a trial with regards to an illness or aging, there are losses, and we think, oh, I can't add another layer to their pain, right? So this is also something that jeopardizes open communication. Third, communication can trigger some unresolved interpersonal issues. So we're fearful of opening a Pandora's box. We don't want to trigger this because we think, oh boy, a lot of stuff is going to emerge and it's not going to be pretty. So we're scared. We're scared of what communication could trigger. So then what would be the way to express our needs without causing too much pain or harm? Well, there are open communication techniques that we can apply. Easy to understand, not always easy to apply. In the open communication framework, speaking in the first person is foundational. So not being accusatory, not being reproachful. Simply speaking about what I feel, what I'm experiencing. Again, this is foundational. A second thing, asking the other person if the moment is right. We tend to forego this step. I feel pressed to say something and you have to sit and hear it. No, that's not how it works. As part of a relationship, one should ask, there are some things that I want to bring up. Is the moment right for you? If the answer is no, that's fine. Then let's make an appointment. We acknowledge, both parties acknowledge that there is a need for expression and that it needs to be taken care of, but right now isn't the right time to do that. If the person is not in a position to receive what you're going to say, it's not going to be helpful to say it. So a few little things like that. Ultimately, if there are too many issues at play, if communication is too difficult due to a lot of emotional baggage and issues, there are third-party professionals that can help. Psychologists, sexologists. People do this as their job and they're exceptional at it to help people have smoother communication. And on the other side of the coin, should the care recipient also express to their caregiver what they're experiencing? Of course. Of course. This is bidirectional. In a relationship, everything is bidirectional. What's good for you is also good for me. For the care recipient, the message here is to acknowledge that this is a trial that you go through together, along with your village. In some contexts, whether we talk about cancer or Alzheimer's disease, there's adult children perhaps that are part of the dynamics. They're impacted as well. So the situation affects many people. acknowledging, therefore, that others are also feeling the impacts of this. I'm not alone in this situation is, again, foundational. So the best way to be helpful is, again, open lines of communication. We often tend to think that I is selfish, and we're scared of being selfish in these circumstances, right? But we need to take the time to speak in the first person for both parties. Is this the best way to protect the relationship? Yes, open, kind-hearted communication, compassion for the other, and self-compassion as well. I was, referring to asking if now is a good time. This is very much part of compassion. So if I really need to vent, then I'll call a friend or a therapist, or find another outlet, or even the Facebook group, so I can vent the overflow, but I have compassion because the message is right now, you're not able to receive what I have to say, but you're not saying that it will never be the case. You're just saying that right now you're unable to receive what I'm saying. And that's a very legitimate need. So compassion, self-compassion, accepting help from our village, seeking help from external resources. These all protect and preserve the relationship. The relationship killer is isolation, thinking that we can do this on our own. This is the ultimate relationship killer. Now, this is PROCURE Health Talks. I'd like to talk about prostate cancer specifically. Unfortunately, for men, prostate cancer comes with a lot of taboos. Men can be uncomfortable with incontinence or erectile dysfunction, and as a result of this, withdraw. They may be distant from their partners. They may not admit what's going on within their bodies. They may not acknowledge that things are different from what they were in the past. So again, communication is going to be the key element here, right? If we're talking about a couple specifically. Yes, definitely. And people don't always realize that we have a natural tendency. Everyone, pretty much everyone, has a tendency to avoid difficult or uncomfortable conversations. However, avoiding these difficult conversations means that you forego discomfort for a while, but it drains you nonetheless. The feelings in your body persist. So if a man isn't speaking, they're still feeling many things. The spouse, same for them. If they're avoiding the issue and not talking about it, the spouse will be ruminating, keeping this all inside, mulling over it, and this drains people emotionally. When we open up the dialogue, we're getting energy. We're recharging our batteries because we're being open. We're being vulnerable. We foster solidarity. The message is, I want to share this with you. I want to do this with you. I want us to be mutually supportive. Yes, we get support from one another. It's a lot harder to have all of these feelings bottled up than it is to share. As you said earlier, one way to discuss our needs is to ask about if the time is right. Are there any other pieces of advice about this? Well, there is no miracle recipe, no panacea, right? Each relationship dynamic is distinct. Some people may have specific questions or contexts that are more suitable for a profitable exchange, but speak in the first person, speak about your experiences is pretty much the key to dialogue. I also assume that discussing a lack of intimacy is part of that. Of course, it shouldn't be avoided. This is at the core of the relationship for a couple, right? Through intimacy, we get revitalized. This is a life force, desire, seduction. It's very much at the core of a love relationship. We get energy from intimacy. We get comfort also. We meet a lot of needs through this intimacy. So if we're being distant, if this becomes a topic that we can't handle, then we're going to mull over it and get emotionally drained. What we're learning tonight is truly eye-opening. Communication matters, and there are resources. I'd like to take a moment to talk about you, l'appui, your organization specifically. What services do you offer more specifically? We've mentioned it a little bit earlier. And are the services free also? Yes, sure. So l'appui is a nonprofit organization founded 12 years ago. Our organization is open to all natural caregivers. For a while, we focused on natural caregivers to elderly people, but now we've broadened our horizons. We're supported by the Quebec government and a few other partners. We have a couple of mandates. We develop services in communities. So we fund local organizations offering information, training, psychosocial services, respite care, etc. So we are very much aware of what is offered in your local community. In parallel, we have the Caregiver Support Helpline. We give information, we refer people to services. We're open 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. for all natural caregivers in Quebec. We can also simply be a listening ear if you need to vent. This is sometimes the most pressing need as part of a phone call. We're also available to, basically welcome and support a caregiver at any stage of the journey. You may look for information about tax credits. It could be very technical questions, or it could be really emotional support. We also offer some trainings on stress management, for instance, or managing Alzheimer's disease. Since the pandemic, we've developed web-based trainings. We also have a directory of resources on our website. So if you want to look things up by yourself on your own, then input your postal code. You can tick boxes for the services that you're looking for, and you'll get a directory of these resources. But if I'm calling, you may tell me something that I wouldn't have looked for. Correct. Now, PROCURE also has a helpline 7 days a week. I'm curious to know, what's the most frequent question that you hear? Is there financial support for natural caregivers? That would be the most common question. We didn't really mention it so much tonight because we were addressing other topics, but impoverishment of natural caregivers, unfortunately, is a reality. There are financial impacts. If we need to take a leave of absence, if we need to carry out renovations in the house for, say, accommodating a wheelchair, there are financial impacts. This is something that we hear about regularly, and people want to know what kind of financial supports exist. We are now wrapping up the webinar. I'd love to know if you have one last takeaway message to send to a natural caregiver, to a care recipient, and to someone who knows a natural caregiver. So 3 takeaway messages. Okay, to the natural caregiver, don't do this on your own. to the care recipient. Accept that your caregiver needs support in order to then support you adequately. And third, to the village who knows a caregiver, ask them how they specifically are doing. Thank you so much, Miss Bickerstaff. This was a very fruitful exchange. You know, as we mentioned, it is never too late, neither too early to reach out for support. So if you have any specific questions related to prostate cancer, we do have a helpline open 7 days a week, just like L'Appui does. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that you are doing well. Thank you.
We warmly thank our experts and our partners for making this webinar possible. To find out more about the tools and resources available to you, or to make a donation, visit procure.ca. Thank you for your support.